Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabyn, and I run tech partner enablement and advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey, everybody, we're back for another episode of the Unlearn Podcast. And I'm supposed to start this conversation by explaining or sharing where I live. So I live in San Jose, in the middle of Silicon Valley, and we used to live in LA. And then I was traveling up here every 2 weeks for a week. And my wife's like, why don't we just switch? Why don't we move there? And then we'll see what happens. And then we move here, and it's not like one of those amazingly planned activities. We moved here in 2 weeks. And then we moved to this place called Longview Drive. It's on the corner of Daly City. It's also the place that gets the most fog. So we go from 72-degree weather to 57-degree weather, and I'm almost getting divorced. And so then we're like, wait a sec, what do we do from here? Then I'm like, well, what are the other warm places around us? And so that's how we landed in San Jose.
You got out of the fog.
Exactly, get out of the fog. With the thick fog, you can't even see things. But one cool thing that we did experience there was off the coast. There's a lot of whales that come in, and so every Sunday or Saturday morning when you wake up early on, at some points in the year, you could actually see whales just playing around and stuff like that. It's actually pretty clear. It was a very cool sight to see.
That is very cool. I would like to see whales on my Saturday mornings.
Who wouldn't like to see whales on their Saturday morning?
We're not doing that here in Atlanta.
We're just spoiled in the Bay Area, it's a world of our own. So anyways, Amanda, welcome to the show. Tell folks a little bit about who you are, and then let's dive in.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Amanda Malko. I am a go-to-market executive, have been in B2B marketing and operations for most of my 20-year career now. So always been in tech, always been sort of at the intersection of marketing and tech. And we were just discussing our journeys. I've lived in New York, LA, and now based here out of Atlanta. And work for a number of companies you might know. So most recently G2, where I was CMO, and now I'm a pretty active advisor there. And then before that, I was at MailChimp and leading their partner ecosystem on our service partner side.
Really? Wait, do you know Joni then?
I do know Joni. She's actually who introduced us, which I know was months ago. But I know Joni well.
Wait a sec. Wait, what?
Yeah, I know Joni well. And so was already familiar with you all through Joni and some of the work that I know she's done, MailChimp has done with you all. And then some of my team members at G2 actually.
Yeah. The whole team actually. It's awesome. Yeah. And we were just at the G2 offices on the same day that Tyler Prince announced he was moving to Snowflake. It was a very big coincidence. And we're having our little meetup, and then Gordart shows up, and we kind of invited him. So he was and then he was like, I have a surprise for you guys. I'm like, okay, I guess we'll find out what happens. And he walks in, and then of course, I know Tyler because I've known him for a while. And he walks in, and I'm like, wait a sec, Tyler said, this is interesting. And then right as we're setting up, I open up LinkedIn, and I'm like, oh shit, Tyler just announced he moved to Snowflake, and oh shit, he's actually here. Oh, this is going to be very interesting. So we actually had him explain to us how his journey from Salesforce moved to Snowflake went. So super big fans of G2.
Love to hear that. I'm obviously a fan and biased, but was a customer actually before coming over as CMO, which is the best
way to do it.
Best market research you can do is being a customer first. So.
Yep. All right. So we always start these podcasts with what's top of mind, right? Because we don't have an agenda, atypical of other podcasts. And we also love to have fun on these things because this is our Friday fun activity. And maybe I don't know what that says about us.
So watch out, you might get some bad jokes over the course of this next half hour.
That works.
So all right, so tell us what's top of mind for you.
Well, I thought about this in advance, but it didn't take me long. I mean, it's somewhat self-selecting in that, when I took a step back from my full-time roles, and a lot of people say they take time off with their family. And for me, that's 100% true, not lip service. really had been going hard for a long time and I wanted to take some time. I have a young son. But I've been spending a lot of time kind of reflecting on what do I want to do next. And so I promise this is not about me, but about
No,
the
this is
role
actually a really good topic. Let's unpack that. Yeah.
but about the role of I've been thinking a lot about go to market and the role of marketing and marketing roles. And, I'm having exploratory conversations and I'm maybe honing in on a realization I feel like I've been sort of circling and talking to peers about for a couple years now, which is, I think the last few years has probably changed the role of marketing, maybe with the exception of like when the internet, which I'm old enough to remember when the internet was getting popular and that changed marketing. Like this feels like that second wave of really dramatic change. And I think it changes the CMO scope. I think it changes the function of marketing. And I think it's going to be really dangerous if we stay in some of the old paradigms of how we think about marketing for anyone in those roles. And also just for the growth of companies, if you're thinking about marketing too myopically for this new era. So that is what I've been thinking a lot about and happy to go double click on that.
There's two topics, right? So the first topic is like actually allowing yourself to take a break is kind of like
Yes.
how I like to put it. And then the second topic is like the role of marketing, right? So let's talk about the first one first, because I think that it's the how you actually come to that realization, and then how do you have enough courage to actually act on that realization, I think is a really important thing to actually discuss. So tell us if you're okay with, and I can share my own journey also, right, in this thing, because I actually did take about 3 months off after running hard at this thing for 15, 16 years. So
3 months? You took 3 months off, Asher?
Oh, yeah. I did. I did.
Well, I stayed at home for 5 years, so I can also contribute to this conversation.
Well, 5 years kind of sounds like wait. 5 years kind of sounds like putting on work. That's like that's like the American problem, right? I'm just kidding. Okay, let's go back to Amanda.
Let's hear Amanda's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no one way to have a career in a life. And it's difficult when you have, especially when you're trying to raise a young family. Like, let's just be honest, no matter, like, I feel very privileged. I, was able to have, good childcare and all that. It's still really hard. And, I think careers are long and life is short.
Yep.
And it's really easy to lose sight of the day-to-day is your life. Like, if you're not enjoying that, then you're missing your life. And so I definitely felt like I'd been going hard for a while and was missing that. And my son, I felt like I traveled a lot and I love that. And I love my work, but it meant that I missed a lot of just getting to know him, and he was changing. Anyone who's had young kids, like I'm living it now. And so he's a different person every 6 months, it feels like. And I felt like I didn't really know him as the way that I wanted to. And I think once I had that realization, which was a really hard one, it was easier for me to accept that I wanted to take the time. And it comes with it came with guilt at first. And I don't know how you felt, Kelly, but I was like, I feel almost guilty taking the time, but then I felt guilty not taking the time. And then I realized like guilt is a trap that is like part of our culture, and we can choose to opt out of it and just live our lives the way that feels true to us and authentic to our families and what we need at that time. And so, it's been great. I'm 6 months in. My son was having health challenges, which was also certainly a catalyst. And he is like a different child. He's had some surgeries. We've finally got some diagnoses, and I'm convinced that would have taken exponentially longer and his health would have suffered more if I hadn't taken it. But even if that wasn't the case, for anyone listening who's like, well, my family's healthy, but I still want to take time, I think if you can hone in on what feels right for you, make a decision about what you want, you'll probably be able to figure out a way, even if it's 3 months, if it's 5 years, like whatever that looks like. And I think I had to get past the guilt and also expectation of what, work life was supposed to look like for me to really hone in on what I wanted it to be. And that's a journey that I think changes, especially if you have a family, it's going to change over time.
How did you broach the conversation in your house? Like was this like hey, by the way, I have a great idea, or just like okay, we have a problem, or like
Asher's like, let me put on my marital therapy hat here.
Yeah. So what? I'm just really fortunate that I have such a wonderful partner in life in my husband. Because it was really funny. I remember saying, I think I want to spend more time at home. And I almost said it like a question, like, I think I want this. And he was like, oh, I'm so glad you finally realized that. Like, I've seen your struggle. I've seen like every time you leave for work, and, he travels too. So like just logistically life was challenging. And he's like, I just feel like it was there, and you just needed to see it. And so he was fully supportive. He was like, I got you. And like, things will have to we'll figure out how to make life work in this new paradigm. And he's also not pushing me to like do any specific thing next, which is, he's like, just figure out what works for you, and we'll figure out how to make it work for the family. So I'm really blessed that I have that.
I think during COVID, a lot of so more people have taken time off post-COVID than before COVID, right? And I think it's also one contributing factor is that people just realize that staying at home can actually be, and people just like upgrade their homes or whatever else they needed to do, get new sound systems so that movie nights were amazing, etc., etc., etc. Actually became like homes. I know this quite a bit because like, when I walk around in the evenings with all our neighbors and stuff like that, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing now, right? And they're like, nothing, we're just hanging out at home. And pre-COVID, you would never have that answer, right? People would be like, we're going camping, we're going boating, we're going doing all these things. And so great, I think it's fantastic.
Well, I'm curious about how you all arrived at your decisions to take time off.
Yeah, let's have Kelly share.
Everybody's so different.
Interesting than mine.
And I was saying, I think, Amanda, your life is long comment is really strong and powerful, because I think a lot of people get very myopic about where they are in the present, and they think, especially women, if I take a step back, my career is going to be torpedoed. Which is a real challenge. Like that, it can happen. So I think you do want to be intentional about where you're going to be after, and are you okay with that, right? Because all these things are just trade-offs. And I think for me, I'm kind of I don't know, a little bit more of a reckless person. I wasn't too concerned about the other side, and so I did want to stay home with my kids when they were young, because I think it goes by in a second, right? Our kids are home with us usually for 18 years of their life. And obviously, as they approach the 18, they're more and more independent. They have all their own friends and activities. So for me, I just wanted to be present and have that experience. And I really was not, I guess the other thing is I'm not as a career driven person, maybe probably as you might have been, Amanda. So for me, I love working, as Asher knows. Like I work all the time, and I get really passionate about my work, but it's more about finding projects and things that I find interesting, fulfilling, and having a positive impact, and thinking about like forward looking, it's my goal in 5 years to say be a VP or a CMO. And I think those are two different ways of looking at work. And so if you do look at it the first way, when you take a step back, you just need to think about, how am I going to get back on the train? Which there are more and more of these programs that are like revamped for people who had experience, even in like investment banking, finance, things like this. It's like you can step out for a few years, and then there's these special programs to get you back on. But I also think, regardless of your field, like you just have to, as long as you're comfortable, repaying some dues in the beginning, if you're hardworking and good at what you do, you'll find a way back in, right? There's always companies. Like for me, I was a lawyer before I stayed at home. And when I came back, I was just kind of looking around. My son was like almost 5. My daughter was almost 1. And I just came across this brand storytell position, like by happenstance. I was like, that looks really interesting. And I've always been a big reader and writer. And it was a smaller branding agency. So they were more open to someone who had like an unconventional background. And I just went from there. And I think that there are always companies, and then maybe they're smaller. You're not going to go like right back to Google, maybe if you were out 5 years, but like you can get back there. So that's kind of my take. And I think it's okay to have seasons in life where you're more focused on different buckets of your life than others, right? We know this when we think about like retirement. But I think the same thing can be said for those like decades of work life. And it doesn't have to be kids, right? It could be travel. It could be you're caring for a parent who's needs caregiving. Like, I feel like there's lots of meaningful human reasons to not focus on work. And I will call it too, like, not everyone's blessed as Amanda and having like the perfect partner be like, whatever you want to do, I'll support. But that's okay too, right? Like, I think that's just, again, looking at the different trade-offs and making sure, that there's not going to be too much resentment in your household, but there's different ways you can approach it. And maybe you live a less luxurious lifestyle, and that's okay, right? Because another way to look at it too is like, remember, what I would call like 3 years. If you were dead in 3 years, is this what you'd be spending your time on? Is that what, are you going to have those regrets and be like,
Yes.
why was I doing all that? And I think what Amanda was saying about taking that perspective out, because when you're in work, especially if you're working 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, all in, like, it becomes very closed down upon you as to this is what matters and this is what my goals are. So like finding a way to like step out and see it, I think is uber valuable.
Kelly, I love that perspective. And I love that I know what you said about work and versus life and your prioritization, but what your choice sounds so conscious. Like, you made such a conscious choice of like where you wanted to spend your time. And I'll say, I haven't always made what I think are super conscious choices, particularly about my personal life, because I've been so focused on work. And so I know we like to talk about frameworks here. So one of the frameworks, which you actually touched on, regrets. And so I use a framework, of course, it's from tech in the terms of it's Jeff Bezos. He kind of coined this framework. But I've been using it my husband introduced me to it. I've been using it for about 5 years, and it's really, really powerful and super simple. And it's called the regret minimization framework. So again, Jeff Bezos coined this. This is not my coined term here, but essentially it's also how he came up with the idea both to do Amazon and like commit fully and leave his corporate job. So you can use it for anything in life, but you essentially look at what you're doing in life, you project yourself onto your deathbed and look back and say, is there anything that I'm doing or not doing right now that I might regret? And I use it every year. So when I set New Year's goals, like I'm really thinking in that terms, like not like, oh, I want to get healthier. I'm like trying to think a bit bigger picture of like, well, let's take a step back from the myopic day to day. What do I think I'm doing or not doing that I might regret? Because I hope I live my life in a way that is maybe more conscious than I used to when I was younger. And I minimize the amount of regrets and maximize the amount of life that I'm going to live. And when I had the realization that like, actually it was quite a lot that I felt like I was going to regret, then it was like, okay, what do I do with this? And it probably took me like 6 months to even like fully decide. And then when I talked to our CEO, he was like, great, how do we keep you involved in the business and transition in a way that honors all the work you've done here and make this like a win-win for everybody? And of course, like I'm grateful I have an amazing like CEO at G2 and Godard able, but I also think that there's a way to approach these conversations in any areas of our life, whether it's our spouse, our work, in a way that's conscious, because it's really hard to argue when someone's speaking their truth. But you have to first define what's true for you. And I guess the only other thing I'll say is like being at a startup or a fast moving tech company, especially in an executive position, it's a marathon. It's the equivalent of a marathon. And this is the only profession, corporate, like executive profession, is the only one where someone would look at you if you took a break. Like if a marathoner or a professional athlete didn't take a break, you'd think they were crazy. But when executives do it, you're like, oh, what's happening in your life that you had to do this? I actually am now committed to doing this every 5 to 7 years, because I just don't think you can be the executive that you can and should be for your teams if you're unwilling to take a break to work on yourself and to be present fully for all areas of your life and set those goals. So I'm here to like advocate for taking a 5 to 7 year break. If you can afford to, it's certainly a privilege, but certainly at, leadership levels, I think it's pretty game changing when you take that time. Even 3 months, Asher, like that's a great break to be able to reset. It doesn't have to be, years.
I'm really glad. So what I've realized in the last 7 months of going full-time to partnership is you need to like design your life and work to like make it real, and somebody, and again, this is not what I said, somebody told me this, and over the last like 7 months, and then when I was coming back from Europe, that's when it like really hit me, and I'm like, a lot of people can actually go and design their lives, but there's no here's design your life 101 in school, so you kind of have to experience this or stumble upon it and just meet up with people who've kind of gone through this. But the importance of just like taking a step back and like designing your life and then thinking, I think is like really, really, really important. And I wish there was like more platforms that like help people understand this stuff, and provided a safe place where they can, where they can actually have these conversations. That it's in those 3 months, by the way, is when I came up with the idea for partnership leaders, because I was trying to figure out, where do partner people go? And there was literally zero modern platforms for them to stand up on and get recognized and go enable themselves. And then we just started as this little hobby through, and then all through COVID, it just like compounded.
Asher, the tagline, or at least at one point, you guys had a tagline about being for personal and professional success. And I don't know if you're still committed to that, but it's interesting, given your comment you just said about having a platform where people are actually talking about these, because
Yep.
PL could be a place for that, right? Because it could present that sort of community element of like, let's have these conversations, especially people who are younger and newer to the workforce, because
Yep.
I think it isn't talked about a lot, and it's very easy, unless you happen to know someone who's kind of like a mentor and gone right through it before you. Often people are just kind of winging it until they end up in a spot where they're not happy with where they landed and the balance is off, right? And then that triggers them to take the bigger look. So I think it's a great service to everyone and all of us as humans to like have these conversations and talk about it together. Because also there's the issue of the judgment, right? Like we want to work as a community to make these things more possible, because American society definitely has, and especially tech, this kind of slant of bias of like, go, 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 go. And you are your work, right? There's this status within the community. Often it's like, do you have a top tier investor? How big is your company? Did it go public? Like, and so I feel like talking about that and asking questions around it, is this the best narrative? Is there more to life? Should we be looking at this more holistically as people? It's great to put those conversations out there.
Yeah, we did. So we started off with like this personal and professional success thing, and then we realized that the same thing. And then so now we're working on basically saying a community as it evolves, if it can reach its platform for success, just the same way you have a platform for sales force, right? And then you say, what's the platform for marketing? I'm pretty sure half the people would say HubSpot, and the other half will say Marketo, But then if you're like, well, what's the platform for success, right? And then you're like, well, what is the platform for success, right? And then you're like, well, what are the APIs for success? And the APIs for success are like, do you understand your value into jobs and the people you want to hire? Or do you understand how mentorship actually works, and like you have to like evolve into mentorship? You just don't start the brand, build a brand, or you can go become a social media influencer and end up on TikTok, right? So, I mean, there's like all these things that have to basically be designed and created, and then I mean, I'll give you an example of like our conference that we do is only for our members to speak at. We are not providing some like 20-year thought leadership. We're saying, come speak at this conference in front of your peers. Be ready. If you mess up, it's okay, but you'll know how to speak in front of 1,000 people. If you can speak in front of 1,000 people, you can go keynote a 10,000 person conference also. So like these platforms for success have to be created, and they're very niche, right? Like the platform for sales is just very different. Success for sales is very different because the salespeople are a little different breed than partner people who are primarily connectors. So that's where we've basically evolved the whole thing. And we will publish a lot more content on like, how do you design your life based on all the experiences that we're gathering from our members.
And that is a good segue back into Amanda's other framework, I think, talking about the sales persona, the partnership persona, and the marketing persona. So I would love to hear, because I feel like in your initial comments, you were talking about two things. One, the transformational change that's similar to the internet that is causing the marketing role to be revamped. So would love your thoughts on how you describe that transition as the prompt, and then also how you see that changing the role and function.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious what you all see too, because I think it's I think that there's a lot of change happening right now, both in technology, and then what does that mean for our roles, whether it's on the marketing side, partnership side, wherever you sit within an organization. What I see is actually not just because of AI. I think that's like obviously a lot of the discussion today. I actually think this has been happening for a couple years now. And really, I think it comes from the way that people buy, especially if you're in tech or software, which is obviously what we're doing and who we're talking to. It's just so fundamentally different than it was even 5 years ago. So we see this at G2, that like rampant change in the way people buy. Obviously, there's more online buying, there's more trials, there's more PLG motions happening. It's starting to look more like e-commerce than what we might traditionally think of as like the enterprise SaaS relationship driven businesses. And then certainly AI is sort of like fuel on top of all of that, right? That changes not just how we buy, but how do we actually do all, create content, interact with customers. Like it's changing so much on top of that. So I think in an environment where your customer behavior is changing so radically and the tools you have to interact with them are also changing so rapidly, job descriptions need to change, functions need to change. And the challenge that I see as I'm starting to have conversations about like marketing roles, as an example, even the CMO role, and this isn't necessarily new this year, it's really been over the last several years. Oftentimes the goals that especially marketing is held to don't align with the scope of responsibilities they're given, right? So I think classic marketing framework, 4 Ps. You've got, product, price and packaging, place, which in our case is like channels and partnerships, and then promotion. Well, most marketing roles I see are just promotion. But what if you have a pricing and packaging problem? What if you're not distributing your product in the right way, whether, it's the channel or is it PLG or enterprise? Is it, sales? Who's is it inbound or outbound? Like who's overseeing sort of the way that who are the partners, right? You're actually going to market in channel capacity. And then your product, like, is your product actually like best suited for the ICP you're trying to go after, or do you need to think more radically about the product strategy? And right now, I think everybody's answer to that is probably yes, given how AI is changing things. So I think that the CMO function has to change. And there's I have some great, peers who have spoken on this topic, because if you're only responsible for promotion, but you're on the hook for revenue or pipeline, you're really not set up in many instances for success at a C level and in particular. And so I really think a lot about like, how can marketing drive impact? And I think it really comes down to how can marketers or go-to-market thinkers drive impact? And I think oftentimes our roles today are pretty limiting because we are in silos that don't serve our companies anymore. And so I don't know what to do. I think we got to have a change in the way we think about organizational structures, really, to have companies that are built, purpose built for this era.
So if we can dive in a little bit.
That's super interesting.
Sorry, I think there's a lag, Kelly. Go ahead. I can ask my question afterwards.
I think your internet's a little dodgy today. I don't know, Amanda, are you picking that same thing up with Asher's internet? Yeah, you're going in and out like a robot. But yeah, I think that it's super interesting because in partnerships, obviously, the cross-functional collaboration is a huge pain point. And I'm trying to connect to what you said about the changing buyer journey, which I agree with. But maybe let's hone in on the product example that you gave, because I think that's what would be your ideal relationship, right? Because product is a function and department. Like the chief product officer is on the hook for driving certain KPIs as well, right? And so, of course, they don't want to just give it over to marketing and say, well, we'll just take the back seat and report to the CMO. But what would in your dream world? Because those things should be interlocked, to your point about cross-functionality, right? And the information that marketing is gathering should be central to those discussions around the product evolution and vice versa. So if you had your dream company and you were the, say, CEO, what would you structure that relationship between product and marketing to look like?
Well, I think that it depends on how, so I'm going to kind of get to your question in a roundabout way, but I promise I'll get to it. I think that one of the things that's needed in organizations is clarity on how go-to-market decisions are made, right? And like who owns that. And so that it's not like a three-legged stool, which that's probably a controversial idea, but like at the end of the day, the CEO owns go-to-market, but who's helping the CEO drive that? It could be the CMO, it could be the chief revenue officer, it could be the chief product officer, it could be a chief strategy officer or commercial officer. I'm seeing the commercial officer title more and more these days. But like who is actually saying not here's what products we have to build, but like here's what has to be true in our product functionality for us to be competitive. And then every year, who is driving the analysis behind that so that the product leader has the inputs they need. It might be marketing. Oftentimes market research does sit with marketing. It might not. But I think it's less about what's the marketing and product relationship first, although it's certainly important to address that, and more about how do we make go-to-market strategy decisions and like what are the inputs and who's owning which pieces. And right now, what I see at a lot of companies, and I'm an advisor now, so I'm seeing more of it than ever, is everybody owns little pieces and nobody looks at it holistically. And that's a problem. And so I would actually rather be a CMO who's like, chief strategy officer's telling us all this is the vision, let's go, than I own this, you own that, you own that. But if we're not in lockstep, the go-to-market doesn't work. That's really, really hard and puts the onus on the tripod of revenue, sales, marketing, and product to be constantly evaluating collective decisions to have a central strategy. That's just really tough to make work, even if you're an exceptional collaborator, which I was very fortunate in my career. I've worked with great product and sales leaders, but it's still really hard to do that. It's like a three-headed strategy, and you're trying to run your function, just really tough to do. So I think that it's a roundabout way of saying product and marketing just need to be singing from the same songbook. And I don't know that there's one right way to organize who creates and how the songbook gets created. I just don't see it working very well in many companies that I work with. And that's not for lack of trying. I think it really is just difficult because we're thinking about organizational structure differently than maybe we've been wired to think about it with like functional areas of expertise.
Yeah,
are you seeing that a certain
great
company size?
Sorry, I'm going to cut through with my robot voice, but like go
ahead with your crappy internet.
The interesting piece of what Amanda just said, is for a C-level person to just have revenue responsibility is actually limiting. They need to be able to operate, and it's interesting because in each function that's happening, it's not just the marketing function. Roles are saying the same thing. If you really deep down listen to what they're saying, stop treating me like a VP of sales. Now, the opposite is also true, which is a lot of VPs of sales were elevated to CRO roles when they did background, right? Or experience. And so because of they got bucketed into this VP of sales role when they were really supposed to be CROs, who was basically supposed to be a router of revenue, not the driver of revenue, And so, but then you come across the partnership people are also saying, hey, partnerships are all about impact the entire customer journey, and it's not just about revenue. And then you go to the customer success people, and the customer success people are like, hey, the post-sales impact really gets realized if the pre-sales requirements are properly gathered, etc. So customer success also plays a role through the entire customer journey, right? And so, Amanda, I think you actually hit it right on the head, which is if there's no orchestrator of revenue, regardless of titles, then everybody's just going to keep budding, right? Now, the market loves the word revenue because it shows up on a P&L and stuff, right? And so the chief revenue officer title is a little bit more appreciated by Wall Street-ish type of companies, right? But the general consensus right now for sure is amongst who's the person who is the orchestrator, and then everybody else just serve that person to make that person great, because that role is equivalent of being a CEO, it's really difficult to be able to operate all four functions at scale. Very, very few people can do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right on central strategy, but I don't even know that they need to serve the person. Like you could have I think they need to serve the strategy that serves the business.
Totally.
So you can have strategy created in a place. And I just want to say, I don't even think it matters who, like, you could have the CEO create the strategy and you report to them, or you could have a chief strategy officer and no one reports to them. I mean, I'm sure that there's challenges with that, but I think it's more that how do you get everybody on the same songbook and create the songbook in a way that's as frictionless as possible, as opposed to everybody owns their pieces. And maybe I'm more kind of attuned to this because I've actually, one thing interesting about my background is over half my roles have been more operator roles. So I've usually not just had marketing roles. So when I get in just a kind of promotion role, which I've only taken maybe one or two this is my career, immediately I'm like, we could do so much more. but you know, there's so much value in promotions done right that it needs to be done exceptionally well, but it works best when it's surrounded by right pricing and packaging, right product and product experience, and the right channels and partnerships. That is the magic formula where promotion works really well. If you don't have those other three really nailed down, promotion is just expensive. Like, it's just wasting money and time, right? So I think that it's like, if you're going to be in a promotion only role, then you really have to make sure you feel good about the strategy and what's happening on the rest of those things. So, and it doesn't, again, I think back to reporting lines. I don't think there's one way. What you said it well, Asher. It just has to be a centrally orchestrated strategy somewhere in the organization so that everybody is swimming in the same direction, to just pick another metaphor.
And you know, it also makes the CEO's job really difficult, because the CEO, if you keep going to the CEO to ask go-to-market questions, all 4 people or 5 people or 7 people are going to that person. Like, the CEO has to go job as well. And now that person, like, I was in one company where the CEO had 21 direct reports. And until we all learned that actually that was not the right way to do it, we just need to centralize some of these things. And the CEO then had like 5 direct reports, which was fantastic. And then all of a sudden,
well, doesn't Elon Musk have like 50 direct reports or something?
I mean,
he likes a flat org, so.
And flat orgs, you know, can be great. I think it depends on the size of the organization. Kelly, I think you were going to ask a question, maybe even about size.
Yeah, I was asking, like, why now is this becoming this orchestration, right? Because presumably businesses should always have been orchestrated, but is this becoming a problem now because businesses have been slow to adjust their structure to the changing buyer journey that you flagged, which, by the way, I completely agree with your analysis on the changing buyer journey. And so what might have been working before as a way to orchestrate is now not the right sort of buckets, and so organizations haven't quite figured that playbook out. Is that where the problem now is coming?
I personally think so. I think it's because the way the buyer is buying is so fragmented, and it's changed so much. So much of it, especially, is happening online. So if you just take, so yes, Kelly, I do think that's why. If you just take PLG as an example, like, who owns PLG in an organization? I mean, really everybody in a way, right? But if you're marketing and product in a PLG organization, that alignment of who's doing what, and it better be excellent. I mean, it has to be excellent. It can't be, well, marketing gets us to this page and then product takes over and we each work in our silos, because it's an e-commerce experience. The consumer's like, everything from who I talk to on the phone, to the chat, to the website, to the product prompt, I just see it as your company and your product. So I think that so many things today have become digitized, online, self-serve, that the siloed kind of, this is product, this is marketing, is antithetical to the way we think as consumers, both in our B2B lives and certainly in B2C.
Yeah, I agree. And I think B2B marketplaces are just exploding, right? And so I think that that's just kind of an extension of the PLG motion often. And it's a good point in terms of the marketing role, right? Like, even today, you still have some large, like, enterprise purchases that are going to be heavily hands-on, and the role of the CMO in that company might be very different than the role of CMO in PLG, because ultimately, when it's a PLG motion, the marketing role becomes much, much more critical through the end-to-end journey, right? Because often you have them becoming users, but then you have to continue to encourage them, I'll say, to convert over to paid. And it's not usually high touch experience. So then that falls to marketing, because marketing ultimately has the promo expertise, but they have like this kind of communicating at scale and communicating digitally. That's their expertise. There's really no one else in the organization that has kind of put together that skill set. So I do think that's very interesting and something that hasn't fully caught up to the market yet.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about experience. So, you know, I'm imagining if someone's listening, they're like, well, I'm not going to get the CEO to change your org structure, and you may not need to, by the way. Sometimes it's as simple as like, we're going to plan and create strategy differently. Right. And if you do it really well, you should come on the show and talk about how you plan and create strategy. But I think there's some simple things that you can do. And whether you sit in marketing or anywhere else, like I'm a big believer in people's careers at all levels. Like, don't think past your job description. If you think about yourself as like helping the business, try not to be too caught up in like what's your role versus what's not your role. I mean, there's an EQ, like a high emotionally intelligent way to do that, but you can add value beyond maybe what's on paper. And I think when you talked about experience, one of the skills and tactics also that I think is really important for businesses where anyone can add value is thinking holistically about your customer experience. And I'll give you 2 real world examples because I think that might help bring it to life, where I used it both at MailChimp and at G2. Again, back to like, okay, let's assume org structure is siloed in product, sales, and marketing, customer success. Let's assume we're all like really good at our functional expertise. And let's assume that very rarely are we all sitting around going, what is a customer seeing, right? Because we have our day jobs to do. You can create moments in time where you get everybody on the same page as what a great experience for your customer looks like, and then make sure you're delivering on that. And if you're not, make a plan together for how. So at MailChimp, we were creating a new product within our product. So it was actually like for a specific segment, and we had to create the product experience almost, I don't want to say from scratch, but we created like an entirely new product experience within the product. Everything from login to pricing and packet, like the brand, everything was new. And we decided, because this was, you don't get that opportunity very often at product companies, certainly not at that scale, we needed to create experience principles. And these weren't product experience principles. These weren't design experience principles. These were, if you're a customer of this particular segment in this product, what is the experience of your total experience with MailChimp? We created those principles collectively across CS. Who do we have in there? Design, engineering, marketing, product, certainly. And everybody contributed. And then we actually had everybody take those experience principles. Things like treat them as an expert was one of our principles. And so everybody internalized, what does that mean for me? So our support team, if you get a call from this type of customer, and you know the experience principle is to treat them like an expert, how do you do that when you show up for them in a way that's different from the other persona? So that was really kind of transformative to the work, because it really did change the way we thought across every team. It didn't matter who created that. It actually mattered that we created it together. So that's one thing we did. And so we had, of course, like we had an experience map and a journey map and all of that. But like, how do we approach that work was the principles. And then on the G2 side, we already have a fully fledged B2B marketplace working very, very well that serves both, 80 million, consumers looking for software, and then software companies all around the world. We wanted to think about, if you're a software company trying to get your presence on G2, claim it, improve it, et cetera, what's your experience? And we're not creating it anew. I hired someone to audit our experience as a customer, as in this case, a software company, and just rip us apart and then do it on other marketplaces and tell us like what was different about our experience and what could be better, and rate us. And I had them do it all the way through to becoming a customer. So like their experience with our account executives, our chat, not to hold anybody like, feet to the fire, just so we could learn. And I invited all our functional leaders to sit in on that meeting and hear the readout. It was super painful. We had a lot of marketing stuff that we needed to improve upon, or things that marketing, in this case owned. But it made us so much better, right? Because we could see where there are handoffs in the product experience because marketing on this page and product on this page. We could see where, we forgot about that particular part of the customer success journey, and so just a simple audit and no objectives other than to learn together can also be a good way to bring that. So that was really long, but I wanted to pick up on what you said, Kelly, about experience, because you don't have to reorg your whole company to create more centralized experiences for your customer.
Yeah, I love that. I love both those frameworks.
I would say if you leave it to Kelly, she is going to reorg the whole company.
What would you do, Kelly? Like, tell
exactly,
us. I want to know the org chart.
Who should go where?
No, I agree with Amanda. I think it's just going to depend on what you're selling and how you're selling and your buyer, right? Because even within the B2B SaaS space, a lot of these spaces look differently. Like, as we all know, selling to developers, for example, is very different than selling to salespeople. The experiences look very different. And I think that has to be baked in, not just to your business model, your marketing model, your product model, but also your org structure. And so I don't think, as Amanda said, there's one size fits all. And I do think the what one might call seamless handoffs underneath a strategic orchestration strategy is what you need to think through. But I do think it's often something that's missed, right? I think when companies start, CEOs often just hire the usual roles. Like, they know they need a marketing leader, they know they need a sales leader, they know they need a CS leader. And it's not, the org chart is often not thought about strategically until perhaps you're very far along and it's very complicated at that stage and much tougher to disentangle. So I think it's a good call out that for earlier stage startups, you may only have 30 employees. Like, think about it now, like, bake it into your strategy conversations. How does what I'm trying to do in my business model tie into how I'm separating out these functions?
So let's bring it back to, so Amanda, then in your opinion, then the future CMO looks like what? Because I don't know if you concluded that part yet. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I not to give a cop-out answer, but I think it definitely depends on the organization. And so I think if you're a CMO or looking to be a CMO, I think you need to look at what do I thrive in doing in terms of skill set? How do I want to be measured, and make sure that the scope of whatever the role is supports both what you want to be doing and what you think you can actually contribute relative to the goals they're giving you. So I mean, in general, though, I think that marketing is a key growth driver for companies. And I think the scope needs to either be more inclusive, or CMOs need to have a stronger seat at the table for strategy, which they often don't at technology companies.
Yep.
In order to really create change. And I think that that's not acknowledged enough, that promotion alone is really, if anything, it can accelerate some problems when they happen in those other 3 Ps.
Yep.
If you do a lot of promotion and the rest of those aren't working really well.
A lot of companies don't do this, but I think some of them, they take leaders from one part of the organization and move them to another part of the organization just so that they get a real feel for how that organization works. That, I think, will actually allow marketing leaders to go through strategy sessions, and then actually sales leaders to like live the life of marketing and then understand really what happens front of the line, middle. Then when you're a C-level person, you can kind of like really a marketing leader at that level can take on the sales org, no problem, or a sales leader. They just are doing things that they really enjoy doing day in, day out, but they're all building the business together.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you can find a place where you can do that and you can have rotations, it's super valuable. I've had a very, in some ways, non-linear career, in that I have taken roles in different functions. So I haven't always been in a marketing function. And in fact, I started my career in sales. At MailChimp, I was in customer success. I mean, I have done that, not always, but often intentionally, because I think, to your point, like, it makes you a more well-rounded leader who can bring that back to whatever your core function or skill set is, and do it with more empathy, but also more shared understanding of like, how do I need to contribute relative to what everybody else is doing? And I think you can do that at any level in your career. Just to start, you could, have coffee with someone like have coffee with a product designer, if you're in marketing. Like you don't have to, you also could just do that, and just get
you don't have to be a chief product officer for a year.
Right.
Which seems like a little bit of risk from the company's perspective.
Yeah. And so I think there's ways to be curious and get that value out of it. But I think it's a great.
So I have a pressing question, because I just feel like one of the biggest things going on in marketing, I would love to get your take on, which is what we were talking about, the buyer's journey and kind of shifting away from outside the company's control, or shifting like how much of it takes place in communities and professional networks through media, and the attribution around that. So I see that as something companies are really struggling with in terms of that is not as easy to have attribution around. They recognize the value to some degree, but there's this tension. So I would just be curious about, where do you think that is now in terms of, we know these professional networks, these communities, all this different media that may not be owned or may be owned, but it's not getting attribution in the same way. Where is that today, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like dark social is a term some people use. It sounds very like foreboding as opposed to what it really is, which is like the digitization of word of mouth, right? Like we're just now having word of mouth conversations online through these different channels. Communities are a great example. I think communities are so needed in so many facets of life, as well as like B2B tech, but and super helpful, but very unattributable. I think there's two things. One, I think our attribution models and tech are going to continue to get better. I think AI actually can be potentially very helpful there. But there's always going to be a lot that can't be measured. And it's funny because word of mouth, if you ask most business owners, anyone at any size is probably going to tell you, like, if you really dig under the hood, how do they think they get business? Good customers talking to other potential customers that they like you, right? And we've never been able to measure that ever in the history of marketing. And I mean, you can argue there's like studies you can do or whatever, but it's mostly happening offline. Now it's actually somewhat happening online in these online communities, groups like yours, which is great. And I think we'll get a little bit better, but probably not a lot at measuring that. And that's okay. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things in marketing on attribution. And I'll give you an example. I worked at a company, fairly sizable, had millions of customers, and was wondering, like, how do we get better attribution for some of these things? And I said, can we just test putting a question? I realized adding a question to our demo, like our free sign up form, is like very controversial, but can we just do it on a subset of users and ask them how they heard about us with a drop down? And in 1 month, we had all this data that very clearly pointed to like top 3 attributed sources. Many of them were like, so word of mouth was one, and we had like a who was it, and I think the other one was event or something like that, where it was like, I heard about you in an event. Those are 2 really hard to measure channels, and they were far and away like in the top 3. And so sometimes we overcomplicate things. It's like, well, we could just ask a subset of users and ask enough that we think is statistically relevant, and then see what they tell us. And so I do think that there's some low-hanging fruit of just like the classic, like, ask them and they'll probably tell you. And then you'll know, should I invest? It's not perfect. It doesn't help you, decide every dollar, but it might be directionally useful.
All right. So
I agree,
all of these podcasts, we're going to run out of time, but we'll definitely have you on again if it's okay with you, Amanda, because there's a number of topics, even from this one, because we never went to the regret minimization framework a lot in detail.
You can Google
it. Totally. But it's
simple.
Chat about things, right? At least that's how I like to learn more. But this digitization of word of mouth, I think there's more to unpack there. But outside of that, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We really if my robotic voice is still going on, this may just be a podcast between you and Kelly. Well, we'll see what happens, But again, thank you so much, and best of luck on your journey.
Thank you. It was great to spend some time with you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Unlearn. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit unlearnpodcast.com for the transcripts.